3 days later, Jack found himself riding the familiar path back to Eleanor's farmhouse. But this time, he wasn't alone. His father, John Morrison, rode beside him on his old bay mare, his weathered face set in an expression that mixed curiosity with apprehension. The 68-year-old rancher had been quiet for most of the journey, lost in thoughts about a brother he had loved but never truly understood. When Jack had told his father about meeting Eleanor, John's reaction had been one of stunned disbelief followed by a flood of questions. How was she? What did she look like? Did she still have that laugh that could make flowers bloom? Was she happy? Was she bitter? Did she blame Thomas for not coming after her? I should have made more effort to stay in touch with Tommy, John said as they approached the farmhouse. After Mama and Daddy died, I got so caught up in my own life, my own ranch, my own family. I told myself he preferred being alone, that he didn't want company. But maybe I was just making excuses. Jack glanced at his father, seeing the guilt that had been eating at him for the past 3 days. You can't change what's already done, Dad. But you can make things right with Eleanor now. The farmhouse came into view, and both men could see Eleanor working in what appeared to be a vegetable garden on the south side of the house. She straightened up at the sound of approaching horses, shading her eyes with one hand as she tried to identify her visitors. When she recognized Jack, her face broke into a smile that seemed to take years off her age. But when her gaze shifted to the older man riding beside him, her expression changed to one of wonder and something that looked almost like recognition. "Johnny," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "Johnny Morrison?" John dismounted slowly, his movements betraying both his age and his nervousness. As he walked toward Eleanor, Jack could see the years falling away from both of them, as if they were remembering themselves as the young people they had been when they last saw each other. "Hello, Ellie," John said softly when he reached her. "It's been a long time." Eleanor studied his face carefully, and Jack could see her mapping the boy she had once known onto the man who stood before her. "You look just like your father did at your age," she said finally. "And you have Tommy's eyes." John's composure cracked a little at the mention of his brother. "I'm sorry, Ellie. I'm sorry I never came to see you when you came back. I'm sorry I didn't try harder to stay in touch with Tommy. I'm sorry for all of it." Eleanor stepped forward and, without hesitation, wrapped the older man in a gentle embrace. "Oh, Johnny, we all have things we're sorry for. But you're here now, and that's what matters." Jack watched the reunion with a tight feeling in his chest, imagining how different things might have been if his family had made more effort to bridge the gaps that grief and pride had created between them. "Jack tells me you've been living here alone since you came back," John said when they separated. "That can't be easy." Eleanor shrugged, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm managing well enough. And I'm not entirely alone. I have all of Tommy's things around me, all his projects and plans. Sometimes it feels like he just stepped out for a while, and we'll be back any minute." She gestured toward the house. "Would you like to come in? I've got coffee on, and I think there are some things you both should see." The interior of the farmhouse was like stepping back in time. Jack could see that Eleanor had made an effort to restore the place to something resembling its former glory, but everywhere there were reminders of the man who had lived here alone for so many years. The furniture was simple but well-made, clearly crafted by someone who took pride in his work. The walls were decorated with photographs of family and landscapes, but there were also spaces where other pictures had obviously once hung. "Tommy kept everything," Eleanor said, noticing Jack's curious gaze. "Every letter I ever wrote him, every photograph we took together, every little memento from our time together. When I left, he boxed it all up and put it in the attic, but he never threw any of it away." She led them to the kitchen, where she poured coffee from an old percolator into mismatched cups. "Yesterday I finally worked up the courage to go through some of those boxes. What I found." She shook her head, as if still trying to process what she had discovered. John leaned forward in his chair. "What did you find?" Eleanor disappeared into another room and returned with a small wooden box, worn smooth by years of handling. "Letters," she said simply. "Letters that Tommy wrote to me, but never sent. 47 years worth of letters." Jack felt his breath catch. "He wrote to you all those years?" "Every week," Eleanor confirmed, opening the box to reveal stacks of envelopes tied with faded ribbon. "Sometimes more often than that. birthdays, holidays, anniversaries of important dates. He wrote to tell me about the weather, about the animals, about books he was reading, and places he wanted to travel. He wrote about his hopes and fears and dreams. She pulled out one of the letters, and Jack could see that the envelope was yellowed with age and had never been sealed. This one is from 1978, 10 years after I left. He wrote about how he had finally finished building the house addition we had planned together, with the extra bedrooms for the children we had hoped to have. He said he knew I probably wouldn't ever see it, but building it had helped him feel closer to the dreams we had shared. John's voice was husky when he spoke. Why didn't he send them? Eleanor's smile was infinitely sad. Because he was afraid. Afraid I had moved on. Afraid I wouldn't want to hear from him. Afraid that contacting me would be selfish if I was finally happy somewhere else. So he wrote all his feelings in these letters and kept them in this box, like a diary of his love. She pulled out another letter, this one more recent. This one is from 5 years ago, around the time his health started failing. He wrote about how he had been thinking about trying to find me, how he wanted to apologize for not fighting harder to keep me from leaving. But then, he decided it was too late, that too much time had passed. Jack could barely imagine the depth of longing and restraint it must have taken to write hundreds of love letters and never send a single one. May I? He asked, gesturing toward one of the letters. Eleanor nodded and handed him an envelope dated from 1985. Jack opened it carefully and read silently for a moment before looking up with wonder in his eyes. He writes about you like you were still here. Like he was just updating you on what was happening in your life together. That's how he thought of it, Eleanor said. Our life together didn't end when I left. In his mind, we were still partners, still building something together. He was just doing it alone until I could come back and see what he had accomplished for both of us. She reached back into the box and pulled out a leather-bound journal. And then, there's this. I found it yesterday, and I haven't been able to stop reading it. John took the journal with hands that shook slightly. What is it? A record of every day since I left, Eleanor said. Tommy wrote down something from each day, usually just a sentence or two. The weather, what work he did, what he was thinking about. But also notes about preparing for my return. Jack looked over his father's shoulder as John opened the journal to a random page. The entry was dated April 15th, 1987, and written in careful, masculine handwriting. Planted Ellie's tulips today, the yellow ones she always loved. Painted the front porch swing. Started reading that book about herb gardening she mentioned wanting to learn about. Dreamed about her again last night. She was hanging laundry and humming. Woke up happy. Every entry is like that, Eleanor said softly. 47 years of daily preparations for a homecoming that never came. He learned to cook the foods I used to make, kept up with the fashions I liked, read books he thought I would enjoy. He lived his life as if I was just temporarily away and would want to catch up on everything when I got back. John was turning pages now, reading entry after entry of faithful devotion and quiet hope. May 20th, 1993. Fixed the window in what would have been Sarah's room. Ellie always said it let in too much cold air. Bought fabric for new curtains, the blue with little flowers she picked out before she left. December 24th, 1999. Made Christmas dinner for one, but set the table for two anyway. Wrapped presents for Ellie and put them under the tree. Told myself this might be the year she comes home. March 3rd, 2010. Turned 65 today. Wondered if Ellie remembers my birthday. Wondered if she's well, if she's happy, if she ever thinks about the life we planned. Decided to start fixing up the guest room just in case. Jack felt tears burning his eyes as he listened to his father read these intimate glimpses into a love that had endured decades of separation and uncertainty. How did he stand it? How did he keep hoping for so long? Eleanor walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the garden where she had been working when they arrived. I think he understood something about love that I was too young and too afraid to grasp. He understood that real love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day. A commitment that doesn't depend on circumstances or guarantees. She turned back to them, and Jack could see that she was struggling with emotions too large for words. Reading these letters, this journal, seeing how he lived his life, It's shown me what love. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Montana plains as Jack Morrison guided his horse along the familiar dirt road that cut through the valley. At 35, Jack had spent most of his life on horseback, working cattle ranches from Wyoming to Colorado. But something about this particular stretch of land always made him slow his pace. The rolling hills seemed to whisper stories of the past, and the old farmhouses scattered across the landscape told tales of families who had carved out lives from the unforgiving soil. Jack had been riding since dawn, making his way to the Henderson Ranch where he was expected to help with the fall roundup. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of changing seasons. His horse, a sturdy quarter horse named Ranger, picked his way carefully along the rutted path, occasionally snorting at the grasshoppers that jumped up from the tall grass beside the road. As they crested a small hill, Jack noticed smoke rising from the chimney of a modest farmhouse nestled in a grove of cottonwood trees about a quarter-mile off the main road. He had passed this place many times over the years, but had never seen any signs of life. The property had always seemed abandoned, with its faded paint and sagging porch. But today was different. Someone was clearly living there now. Curious, Jack guided Ranger down the narrow lane that led to the farmhouse. As they drew closer, he could see a woman moving around in the yard behind the house. She appeared to be hanging laundry on a clothesline that stretched between two tall posts. The sight struck him as oddly peaceful in the quiet morning air. The woman looked to be in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun, and wearing a faded blue dress that had seen many washings. She moved with deliberate care, shaking out each piece of clothing before pinning it to the line. A large wicker basket sat at her feet, still half full of wet laundry. Jack dismounted and tied Ranger to a fence post near the edge of the yard. The woman looked up at the sound of his approach, and he was struck by her eyes. They were a remarkable shade of green, bright and alert despite her age, and they seemed to hold depths of experience that spoke of a life fully lived. "Morning, ma'am," Jack called out, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I was riding past, and thought you might could use some help with that laundry." The woman straightened up, studying him carefully for a moment before a gentle smile crossed her face. "Well, that's mighty kind of you, stranger. I don't get many visitors out here, and I have to admit, this old back of mine isn't what it used to be." She gestured toward the basket. "I'm Eleanor Whitman, though most folks just call me Ellie." "Jack Morrison," he replied, stepping forward to tip his hat again. "I work the ranches hereabouts, and I've ridden past your place many times. Never saw anyone living here before." Eleanor's expression grew thoughtful. "I just moved back about 3 weeks ago. This was my childhood home, but I've been away for a very long time. After my husband passed last year, I decided it was time to come back to where I belonged." Jack bent down and lifted the heavy basket, surprised by how much wet laundry remained. "Let me help you get this finished up. It's the least I can do for a neighbor." As they worked together in comfortable silence, hanging sheets and shirts and undergarments on the line, Jack found himself stealing glances at Eleanor. There was something familiar about her, though he was certain they had never met. Perhaps it was just the way she moved with such grace despite her age, or the way she hummed softly to herself as she worked. "You said this was your childhood home," Jack said as he hung a faded quilt on the line. "Have you got family in these parts?" Eleanor's hands stilled for a moment on the clothespin she was holding. "Not anymore. My parents are long gone, and my only brother died in the war. Korea." She shook her head sadly. "I had hoped to find some connections when I came back, but time has a way of erasing the past." Jack noticed that among the clothes were several men's shirts and a pair of well-worn work boots hanging by their laces. "Your husband's things?" he asked gently. "Yes," Eleanor replied, her voice soft. "I know it might seem strange, keeping them, washing them, hanging them out like he's still here, but somehow it makes me feel closer to him. We were married for 47 years, and I'm not quite ready to let go of all the reminders." There was something in her tone that made Jack look at her more carefully. The pain in her voice was fresh, raw, despite the fact that she had mentioned her husband dying the previous year. He had heard that particular note of grief before, in the voices of other widows and widowers he had known, but there was something more here. Something deeper. He must have been a good man, Jack said, hanging up a flannel shirt that was soft with age and many washings. He was, Eleanor said, and for a moment her eyes seemed to look beyond the present, into memories only she could see. He was strong and gentle and patient. He had these hands. She held up her own weathered hands, studying them. He had these big, capable hands that could gentle a spooked horse or hold a baby with equal skill. He could fix anything that was broken. Jack found himself drawn to the emotion in her voice. There was love there, certainly, but also regret, and something that seemed almost like guilt. Sounds like you were lucky to have each other. Eleanor was quiet for so long that Jack wondered if he had said something wrong. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. We almost didn't. We almost lost each other before we really had a chance to begin. Before Jack could ask what she meant, Eleanor suddenly straightened up and seemed to shake off whatever melancholy had settled over her. Listen to me, going on like an old fool. You came here to help with laundry, not to listen to an old woman's rambling memories. But Jack was intrigued now. There was clearly a story here, and something about Eleanor Whitman made him want to hear it. I don't mind listening, if you don't mind sharing. Sometimes it helps to tell stories to someone who didn't know the people involved. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing something in her mind. Then, she reached into the laundry basket and pulled out a small, delicate piece of white fabric. It was a baby's christening gown, yellowed with age but still beautiful in its intricate embroidery. This belonged to my daughter, she said, holding it up to catch the morning light. She would have been 52 this year. Jack noticed the careful way she spoke. Would have been. She died when she was 3 days old. Eleanor said simply. Born too early, too small. The doctors said there was nothing they could do. I'm sorry, Jack said, and meant it. He could see the pain that still lived in her eyes, even after all these years. Eleanor smoothed the tiny gown with careful hands. Her name was Sarah. Sarah Rose. We had planned everything so carefully, her father and I. We were going to give her everything we never had, all the love and opportunities and security. We were going to be the perfect family. She paused, and Jack could see tears gathering in her eyes. But life had other plans. And after we lost her, well, things changed between us. The grief was too much. We said things, did things, we hurt each other in ways that seemed impossible to repair. Jack felt like he was witnessing something deeply personal, something that Eleanor had perhaps never shared with another soul. The morning air seemed to hold its breath as she continued. We separated, she said finally. I was young and stupid and so full of anger at God, at the world, at him for not being able to fix what was broken. I left him here and went to live with my aunt in California. I told myself it would be temporary, just until I could heal enough to come back and try again. But you didn't come back, Jack said gently. Not for 47 years, Eleanor confirmed. By the time I was ready to swallow my pride and admit I had been wrong, I thought it was too late. I thought he would have moved on, found someone else, built a new life. I was too afraid to find out. She hung the christening gown on the line with infinite care, and Jack noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. It wasn't until last year, when I got word that someone from this area was looking for me, that I learned the truth. Jack's curiosity sharpened. What truth? Eleanor turned to face him fully, and he saw that her eyes were bright with tears that refused to fall. That he never stopped looking for me. That he never remarried, never moved away from this place. That he spent 47 years waiting for me to come home. The weight of her words settled over them like a heavy blanket. Jack could hardly imagine the magnitude of such devotion, or the crushing realization that must have come with learning about it too late. The person who contacted me was his lawyer, Eleanor continued. He had left instructions that if anything ever happened to him, someone should try to find me. The house, the land, everything. He left it all to me, along with a letter. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn soft from many readings. He wrote it just before he died. The doctors had told him he didn't have long, and apparently he spent his last weeks trying to make sure I would know that he never stopped loving me, never stopped hoping I would come back. Jack felt a tightness in his chest as he watched this strong woman struggle with the weight of such profound regret. What did the letter say? Eleanor unfolded the paper with careful hands. He said he understood why I left. He said he never blamed me for needing to go, that grief makes people do things they wouldn't normally do. He said he always believed that someday I would heal enough to remember the good parts of what we had, and when that day came, he wanted to be here waiting. She looked up at Jack, and now the tears did fall, tracing silver tracks down her weathered cheeks. He said he kept all of my things, just as I had left them. He said he washed and aired out my dresses every spring, just in case this was the year I came home. He said he never gave up hope that we would have another chance to be the family we had dreamed of being. Jack felt his own eyes burning as he imagined this unknown man, faithful and waiting through decades of loneliness, never giving up hope for a reunion that would never come. What was his name? Thomas, Eleanor whispered. Thomas Morrison. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Jack's hand went to his chest, where his heart was suddenly pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Morrison. Eleanor nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Thomas Morrison. He was born right here in this house in 1945. His parents were John and Mary Morrison. Jack's legs suddenly felt unsteady. John and Mary Morrison. His grandparents. Which meant that Thomas Morrison, the man who had spent 47 years waiting for Eleanor to come home, was his uncle. The uncle he had never met, whose name was rarely mentioned in his family because the story was too sad to tell. Jack Morrison. Eleanor repeated his name slowly, as if tasting it for hidden meanings. Morrison isn't exactly a common name around these parts anymore. Could you possibly be related? Jack nodded, his throat too tight to speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice, it came out hoarse and strained. Thomas Morrison was my uncle, my father's older brother. Eleanor went perfectly still, the piece of laundry in her hands forgotten. Your uncle? Dad never talked about him much, Jack managed. Just said he had a brother who lived alone on the old family place, that he was a good man who had suffered some heartbreak. Dad always meant to bring me out here to meet him, but somehow we never got around to it. And then, last year, when Uncle Thomas died, Dad was too broken up about it to even attend the funeral. Eleanor sank down onto an old wooden chair that sat beside the clothesline, the laundry forgotten at her feet. You're John's son? Little Johnny who used to come visiting with his parents when he was small. Jack's eyes widened. You knew my father? I knew your grandparents too, Eleanor said, her voice filled with wonder. Your grandmother Mary was like a mother to me after my own parents died. She was the one who taught me to cook, to keep house, to be a proper wife. And your father? He was just a boy then, maybe 7 or 8 years old. He used to follow Thomas and me around like a puppy, always wanting to help with whatever we were doing. The pieces of family history that had never quite made sense to Jack were suddenly falling into place. His father's reluctance to talk about Uncle Thomas. His grandmother's sadness whenever the subject of her elder son came up. The way his grandfather would sometimes stand at the window looking toward the old family homestead with an expression Jack could never quite interpret. They never told me about you, Jack said softly. I never knew Uncle Thomas had been married. Eleanor's smile was infinitely sad. We were never officially married. We were engaged, planning the wedding for after our baby was born. But when we lost Sarah, and I left, well, there wasn't much point in talking about what might have been. Jack looked around the farmyard with new eyes, seeing it now not just as an old homestead, but as the place where two people had loved and lost, and where one of them had spent nearly 5 decades hoping for a second chance. He really waited all this time? According to his lawyer, he never even dated anyone else, Eleanor said. The neighbors told me he kept to himself mostly, worked the land, took care of the animals. But every spring he would fix up the house like he was expecting company. Every year he would plant my favorite flowers in the garden. Every Sunday he would dress up and sit on the front porch for an hour or two, just in case this was the day I came home. The magnitude of such devotion was almost too much to comprehend. Jack tried to imagine spending decades of his life waiting for someone who might never return, maintaining hope in the face of endless disappointment. What are you going to do now? Eleanor looked up at the laundry hanging on the line, at the baby clothes and the men's shirts and the worn work pants that belonged to a man who had been gone for over a year. I don't know, she admitted. I came back here thinking I might find some peace, some way to make sense of all the years we lost. But being here, surrounded by evidence of his faithfulness, it just makes the regret that much harder to bear. Jack felt a sudden, powerful conviction that he had been meant to stop here this morning, that this meeting was not just coincidence, but something that had been arranged by forces beyond his understanding. Maybe, he said carefully, Uncle Thomas is still here somehow. Maybe he's finally getting his chance to welcome you home. Eleanor looked at him sharply. What do you mean? I mean, maybe there's a reason I happened to ride by this morning just when you needed help with the laundry. Maybe there's a reason I'm the first person you've told this story to since you came back. Maybe Uncle Thomas is still taking care of you, just in a different way. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. You sound like him, she said finally. Thomas always believed that things happened for a reason, that the universe had a plan even when we couldn't see it. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Tell me about him. Tell me what he was like when you knew him. Eleanor's eyes grew distant as she reached back into memories that were both precious and painful. He was the kindest man I ever knew, patient and strong and absolutely devoted to the people he loved. He had this way of seeing the best in everyone, even when they couldn't see it themselves. She stood up and began hanging laundry again, but her movements were slower now, more thoughtful. When we first started courting, I was so young and so afraid of everything. My parents had died in a car accident when I was 17, and I felt like everyone I loved was going to leave me. But Thomas, he never got frustrated with my fears. He would just hold my hand and tell me that love wasn't about guarantees. It was about choosing to trust someone with your heart even when you couldn't be sure what the future would hold. Jack found himself hanging on every word, hungry for details about this uncle he had never known but who was clearly an extraordinary man. How did you two meet? At a church social, Eleanor said, and for the first time since they had started talking, she smiled. I was new in the area, staying with my aunt temporarily while I tried to figure out what to do with my life. Thomas was there with his family, and I remember thinking he was the most handsome man I had ever seen. But it wasn't just his looks that drew me to him. It was the way he treated everyone around him with such respect and kindness. She shook her head, lost in the memory. I was so shy I could barely speak to him, but he was so patient. He spent the entire evening just sitting with me, asking gentle questions and telling me about his dreams for the future. He wanted to expand his father's farm, maybe raise horses along with cattle. He wanted to build a big house with lots of bedrooms for all the children he hoped to have someday. And you fell in love, Jack said. Completely, Eleanor confirmed. I had never felt anything like it. With Thomas, I felt safe for the first time since my parents died. I felt like I had found my home, my purpose, my future. We were so young and so sure that love was enough to overcome anything. Jack could hear the pain creeping back into her voice as she remembered how wrong they had been. But then, you lost the baby. Eleanor nodded, her hands stilling on the clothespin she was holding. We were so excited when we found out I was expecting. Thomas was over the moon. He started working on the nursery immediately, painting walls and building furniture with his own hands. He would talk to my belly every night, telling the baby about all the things they were going to do together. She reached into the basket and pulled out a tiny pair of knitted booties, yellow with age. He made these, she said softly. Learned to knit just so he could make something for his child with his own hands. The image of his tough, rancher uncle learning to knit baby booties was so touching that Jack felt tears prick at his eyes. He must have been devastated when she died. We both were, Eleanor said. But we grieved differently. I wanted to rage and scream and blame someone for what had happened. Thomas, he turned inward. He stopped talking about the future, stopped making plans. He would just work from dawn to dusk, like physical exhaustion could somehow numb the pain. She hung the booties on the line next to the christening gown. I thought he was pulling away from me, that he blamed me somehow for what had happened. I thought he regretted ever falling in love with someone so young and inexperienced. And in my grief and my fear, I convinced myself that leaving was the kindest thing I could do for both of us. Jack was beginning to understand the tragic misunderstanding that had cost two people nearly 50 years of happiness. But he didn't want you to go. I know that now, Eleanor said. His letter made it clear that he was just trying to give me space to grieve, that he was afraid of pushing me too hard or too fast. He was waiting for me to come to him when I was ready. But I was too young and too scared to understand that silence didn't mean rejection. The morning sun was climbing higher now, warming the air and setting the laundry to dancing in the gentle breeze. Jack found himself thinking about all the mornings his uncle had spent alone in this place, all the laundry he had hung by himself, all the quiet meals and lonely evenings and nights spent hoping for a sound that never came. "Do you think you can find peace here?" Jack asked gently. Eleanor looked around the farmyard, at the house where she and Thomas had planned to raise their family, at the clothesline where she had once hung tiny clothes full of hope and promise. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Some days I think being here is just a form of self-punishment, a way of making sure I never forget what my fears and pride cost us. But other days—" She paused, and Jack waited patiently for her to find the words she needed. "Other days I feel like he's still here somehow. Like all that love and faithfulness left an imprint that can't be erased by death. When I'm working in the garden he planted for me, or sitting in the chair he refinished hoping I would someday use it, I feel closer to him than I have in 47 years." Jack looked at this remarkable woman who had returned to face the consequences of a choice made in grief and youth, and he felt a profound respect for her courage. "Maybe that's enough," he said. "Maybe feeling close to him is a kind of peace." Eleanor smiled at him then, and Jack could see why his uncle had fallen so completely in love with her all those years ago. Even now, weathered by age and sorrow, she had a beauty that came from deep within, a strength that had carried her through decades of regret and brought her home at last. "Thank you, Jack Morrison," she said, "for helping with the laundry, for listening to an old woman's story, for giving me a chance to remember your uncle through someone who shares his blood. I think maybe you're right. Maybe this morning wasn't just coincidence." As they finished hanging the last of the laundry, Jack found himself reluctant to leave. There was something peaceful about this place, something that spoke to a part of his soul he hadn't even known was restless. And there was something about Eleanor that made him want to protect her, to make sure she didn't spend her remaining years as alone as his uncle had. "Ma'am," he said as he prepared to mount Ranger, "would it be all right if I came back to visit sometime? Maybe brought my father with me? I think he'd like to meet you. And I know it would mean a lot to him to hear stories about Uncle Thomas." Eleanor's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I would love that, Jack. I would love that more than you know. Prepare yourself for a journey that begins with something as simple as offering to help with chores and ends with revelations that will make you question whether coincidences really exist, or if the universe has been orchestrating something far more magnificent all along. Feels disconnected. We are all more linked than we ever imagined.